Welcome to a special edition of Hard Talk from Bogota, Colombia, with me, Stephen Sackur. Not so long ago, I'd have been apprehensive about walking these streets because Bogota was a city of car bombings and kidnappings fueled by a political insurgency and drugs trafficking. But Colombia has changed. And my guest today is the president of this country, Juan Manuel Santos. Now, he is the driving force behind a peace process with the armed revolutionary movement, the FARC. It's difficult, it's divisive, but will it end in success? President Juan Manuel Santos, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you.
You have taken an enormous personal gamble. For 3 years or so, you have been committed to a peace process with a movement which you used to call terrorists and bandits. Do you feel the pressure that you're under?
Yes, every day. But when you have an objective and you think and you're convinced that it's the correct objective and that it's the correct thing to do, then the pressure is manageable. And of course, these type of processes are difficult. It's much easier to make war, much easier to lead in times of war. To make peace, you have to have a different type of leadership. You have to be able to convince people to change their minds, their attitudes, their way of approaching the enemy or the victimizer, and that's much more difficult.
You say it's easier to make war than to make peace. I just wonder when the seed was sown in your mind, this idea that you could be the bridge, you could reach out and you could begin a dialogue which would take you all the way to lasting peace. Because of course you were defense minister at a time when the government of President Uribe was launching a massive military operation against the FARC. You were responsible for some famous military victories. But even at that time, was it in your mind that you would be a man of peace?
Even before, I was accused by the government of a former president of Samper to conspire with the guerrillas and the paramilitaries against the government to reach peace. So I've been studying and I've been involved in this objective of trying to get a negotiated settlement for many years.
Tell me about that historic handshake with the leader of the FARC, Timochenko, in Havana in September, last September. It was a strange photograph. You were there with him, Raul Castro, president of Cuba, overseeing it, and you didn't look very comfortable. What were you feeling?
Well, it's a matter of timing, and I thought it would be the correct time to start meeting face to face with the commander of the FARC, to try to push negotiations at a higher level, which we are doing, and that it was the correct moment to meet him. Of course, he's been our enemy for all my life, and I've been his enemy for all life.
That's right, and most Colombians believe that he has the blood of hundreds of Colombian civilians on his hands. The US government has a bounty of $5 million on his head because they say he's a kingpin of the FARC's cocaine trafficking. Yes. And you shook his hand.
Yes, because you don't make peace with your friends, you make peace with your enemies, and he is the enemy. And if we want to end this war, we have to sit down with our enemies, and if we have an agreement, shake their hands to seal that agreement.
And trust them.
Well, we have to trust them, but at the same time we have to put in place the necessary guarantees for them to comply with what they agree with.
But why would you trust people who haven't even released all the hostages, the captives that they have currently in their charge? You know, they have not made, according to many Colombians I've spoken to, even the most basic concessions that the people of this country would have expected of people serious about peace.
I started this process with a very high level of skepticism. And I started this process by not believing a word they said. But throughout the process, they have given assurances and they have made specific actions that have convinced me that this time they want a settlement. Before, many attempts that other governments made with the FARC, they did not have that in mind. They used the negotiations to get stronger militarily or get stronger politically. In this case, today, I am absolutely convinced that peace is possible and that they want a settlement.
Some people think you are being naive, and not just any people, but really important people, like your former political boss, in some ways your mentor, the former president Alvaro Uribe. He says, and I'm using his words, that you have cozied up to terrorism. He says, Santos, it's not peace that is near, it is surrender to the FARC.
Well, who is giving up their arms and who is keeping the arms? If you read what is being negotiated, what we are simply accepting is they can leave their arms, disarm, and continue their political struggle through legal means. And that's what a peace process is all about. And they are being subjected to transitional justice. So the most responsible will go through transitional justice in order to respect the rights of the victims, which is sort of the center of the solution of this conflict. That's
well, you're right, it's the center of the debate right now in this country, this idea of transitional justice, because the truth is, if you look at the detail of the agreement, the draft that you've come up with, those who testify, confess to violent activities, even extraordinarily violent activities, will avoid prison. They will have, quote unquote, alternative justice. Maybe their movements will be controlled for 5 years, but they will not be put behind bars.
And what did the UK do with the IRA? What has all the countries that have negotiated a peace process like we are negotiating? This is the last armed conflict in the whole of the Western Hemisphere. And one of the difficulties in negotiations with the FARC was they were saying, with a good argument, we don't want to be the first guerrilla movement to give up our arms and go to jail and be submitted by a court that we don't accept. Now they are accepting the court. They are being investigated, they are being judged, they are being condemned, and they have to pay a sanction.
But in President Uribe's words, they are getting away with murder.
Well, if you analyze what President Uribe has been saying, you will come to the conclusion that he's being a bit emotional, and that what he's saying
well,
is
the Colombian
not the truth.
people are emotional. Of course they're emotional. 220,000 people died in this war. It lasted 50 years. People are emotional.
But that's exactly why we are trying to reach a peace agreement. So we don't have to have 220,000 more victims. A war is a factory of victims, and I want to stop that factory. We have suffered too much in this country, and we are negotiating in a position of strength. And if you analyze what we have agreed up to today, this is a very good package.
A poll of Colombians in August, admittedly a few months ago, but not so long ago, more than 90% of those polled wanted the FARC's key leaders to go to jail, to be behind bars.
Of course. I mean, this is something that I understand very well. Not only that, they don't want the FARC to enter politics, and they want every FARC member to go to jail. This is a very normal human reaction. But the problem here is to get the whole package, and you tell the people, listen, there are there's a price to pay, but this is the package for peace, and this is the package that means war for 20 or 30 more years.
So to be
people
specific,
of Colombia, the people of Colombia will overwhelmingly, when I submit this to a plebiscite, which I'm going to do because I have this commitment, I am absolutely convinced that they will be overwhelmingly in favor of peace.
So your message to the people of your country is the key leaders, and we talked about Timoshenko, whose hand you shook, who we know was a revered military leader of the FARC, and others like Ivan Marquez. You're saying to me that they are more likely to end up in the Colombian Congress as politicians than they are to be in a Colombian jail?
No, if we reach a final agreement, yes, of course.
Would you welcome them into Colombian politics?
Well, the whole idea of a peace process is to have the people who are in arms to give up their arms and continue doing their politics through legal means. So that, of course, that they would be welcomed, the FARC, into Colombian politics, because the peace process is exactly about that issue of leaving the arms, politics with no violence. That's the whole idea.
For the victims, and let's not forget that I think the government here recognizes that there are millions, up to 6 or 7 million victims of one sort or another.
7.5 million.
Right. 7.5 million victims.
Yes.
To them, what is your message? Is it that you have defeated the FARC, that the FARC have surrendered, or simply that you and the FARC have come to a political arrangement?
It's in between. The FARC is defeated in the sense that they now accept and they realize that they will never win. They can continue their armed struggle for many, many more years because our geography, our conditions will allow that. But at the same time, I'm giving them what in the military jargon you call a golden bridge. Okay, you can come out of this with dignity, and dignity is a key word. And that's the settlement that we're trying to do, to finish a war of 50 years. And if you analyze the rest of the history of the human planet and the peace processes that have been negotiated, you will realize that this is the key issue and the key objective, and that's what we're trying to achieve.
You've talked about emotion and you've talked about dignity. I just wonder on a personal level how you feel about the victims, those whose parents were perhaps murdered, those who were held in the jungle for 8 years tied to a tree, those who saw their own children wiped out in massacres of villages. How do you explain to them that you believe it's important to give the FARC dignity?
The victims are my strongest allies. The source, the principal source of the support I have are the 7.5 million victims. I talk to them every single day. And talking to them is what gives me more energy to continue and persevere in the peace process. They tell me, no, listen, I've been a victim. I know what it feels to be a victim, and I don't want other people to suffer as I have suffered. Continue, President Santos. Don't give up. And they have been a tremendous source of support in this very difficult process.
One big question is where the Americans sit on this. Now, President Obama has hosted you at the White House. He's praised your efforts. He thinks it's great that you're trying to make peace. But the Americans, well, they have at least, I think, 70 names of FARC fighters, leaders, who they want extradited to the United States to face very serious charges of drugs trafficking, violence, whatever. If they pursue those names when you've made peace with the FARC, will you extradite them to the United States?
No. They know that I'm not going to extradite these people if we reach a peace agreement.
But there's a $5 million bounty on Timoshenko's head.
Well, but that $5 million bounty on Timoshenko will have to disappear because I'm not going to extradite him.
You're going to protect him?
No, but
it's extraordinary.
No, it's not extraordinary. It's simply that, can you imagine a guerrilla leader to negotiate a peace process to end up with a life prison sentence in the U.S. This is absurd. So,
well, with all due respect, it's exactly what your government did do for some of the paramilitary leaders who you had a process of demobilization with, and it ended up some of them were sent to America for trial.
Well, that was a decision of my former boss, President Uribe. My decision here is we reach an agreement, and I stand by this agreement, and I respect the items in the agreement. And one of them, of course, is to not extradite the leaders of the FARC to the United States to end up all their lives in an American jail.
Right now, the FARC has a ceasefire. They've also said that they've stopped buying arms. They said they've stopped training their cadres. They say that they are absolutely committed to this ceasefire. You, on the other hand, your military is not right now in a ceasefire at all. You're still conducting operations.
Yes.
But you've said that you will consider a ceasefire very soon.
Yes.
Tell me now, when will you implement a ceasefire?
As soon as we negotiate with the FARC all the items that will make the ceasefire an effective ceasefire. And I've told them, let's accelerate this negotiation, and we can do that if they want in 2 or 3 weeks. And I'm willing to declare a ceasefire as soon as possible. And the only condition is to negotiate all the issues that surround an effective ceasefire. And that's what I've been offering, and that's what we're trying to do.
We've talked a lot about trust, and if you are convinced that the FARC is absolutely serious and committed to their ceasefire, isn't it incumbent upon you now to return the favor, to ceasefire too? Otherwise, you could have a situation where the FARC fighters aren't fighting and your military are going into the jungle and blasting away, killing hundreds of them.
First of all, my response to that is I will not bomb your camps, but I will continue to go after you as long as you continue to extort people. The extortion, they live out of extortion. They have not kidnapped, they stopped kidnapping. They live out of illegal mining, and as long as they do anything illegal, well, my armed forces are going to go after them. That's why I said to them, let's negotiate the whole package of a ceasefire where everything should be taken into account, and I am willing to declare a ceasefire as soon as possible, as soon as we negotiate the whole package.
The big question for Colombians is how this plays out early next year. You have said that you want a deal by the end of March 2016.
We have agreed with the FARC that by the 23rd of March, we should sign the final agreement.
That is the final, permanent, lasting peace for Colombia.
If we reach that agreement, yes.
But the point is, you've committed to what you call a plebiscite or a referendum, where the final decision will be with the people of this nation.
Yes.
So when will that happen?
That will happen after we sign the final agreement. If we sign the final agreement between around March, let's say, then the plebiscite would be done a couple of months afterwards. We need to have time to explain to the people what the agreement is all about.
But that
and the people can say, no, we don't like it, and then there's no deal.
What? After all of this,
yes,
the years of negotiation, you
yes,
saying that this is vital for the
yes,
future of your nation, you're telling me that if the public vote against it, you'll just walk away?
Yes, because that's what the commitment I made since the very beginning. The people.
With respect, Mr. President, you will have to resign at that point.
Well, I will be in a serious difficulty, but I am absolutely convinced that the overwhelming majority of the Colombians will support me, will support this peace process.
Seems to me your biggest problem right now isn't with the FARC, it's with former President Uribe, who is going to mass all of his resources, and he has a lot of resources, and he has a lot of political friends, and he is going to fight you tooth and nail in that referendum process, because he says, come back to those words, you are surrendering to terrorism.
Well, the people will decide. And I am, again, I will repeat, absolutely convinced that the overwhelming majority of the people will back me as they have been backing the peace process since the very beginning, sometimes with a high degree of skepticism. But the last poll, now that you mentioned the polls, the last poll, 82% of the Colombians said they are interested and they would be...
They're interested, sure.
And they would support the signing of a peace process because they think they will benefit.
And a final thought, drugs. It seems to me that you're sending signals as president of Colombia that you believe the American strategy in Latin America, the war on drugs, needs to be completely rethought. You made a speech not so long ago where you said, how do I explain to a peasant in Colombia that I have to put him in prison for growing marijuana, whereas in Colorado or in Washington State in the US, it's legal to buy that very same marijuana. The world needs an effective, fresher, more creative focus to win this campaign against drugs.
And it's not only the US, it's the world. 40 years ago, the United Nations launched the war on drugs. And the war on drugs has not been won. We are the country who has suffered the most of any country in the world in this war on drugs. We have sacrificed our best leaders, our best politicians, our best journalists, our best judges, our best policemen, and we are still the #1 provider of cocaine to the world. And this is a tremendous problem. The agreement with the FARC has a very important item, which is, in a way, they switch sides. They protect and they finance themselves through drug money, and they are now committed to helping the government do away with the illegal crops, substituting for legal crops, and do away with the labs and the corridors. This is a major, major breakthrough in this war on drugs.
Yeah,
but at the same time, we need to sort of re-engineer the approach on the war on drugs because we have not been effective.
And you have, in the recent past, signaled to the United States that you want change. You're no longer spraying the coca crops.
Right.
The United States is not happy about that, but you said, you know what?
Some people in the United States, others are very happy.
Yeah, but the bottom line is this. You, over the last decades, have taken billions and billions of US dollars to join them in the fight against drugs. Are you saying that in the future, that will no longer be your strategy?
We are pursuing a more effective strategy. For example, the spraying. Even we sprayed more in the last, before October when I stopped it, in the last 2 years than ever before, and the coca production went up.
So what's the solution? Is it to legalize drugs? Because some Latin American leaders are talking about legalization.
The solution is exactly what we're trying to convince the world to do, because this is not an issue for one single country. A single country, Colombia or Uruguay or Peru, cannot by itself. This is a multinational problem and has to be approached multinationally.
And is legalization a part of the solution?
Legalization could be a part of the solution. Decriminalization is certainly part of the solution. A more effective approach, taking away the illegal money from those mafias, those organized crime that are so powerful in Mexico, in Central America, in Europe, in the Middle East. This is an approach that has certainly not been effective, and I'm sorry to be so presumptuous, but we have, the Colombians, more moral authority to talk about this issue than any other country in the world.
President Santos, thank you very much for being on Hard Talk.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you,
And I hope maybe I can come back next year or the year after. Let us see how it goes. Goodbye, bye.